Let's unpack the gap theory a bit. Because they view the fall of Satan and the destruction of earth as the way to explain the entrance of evil and death into the world, gap theorists want to translate the first two verses of Genesis 1 a bit differently than you just heard a few minutes ago. Earlier, I recited the New King James translation of Genesis 1:1 and 2, and most English versions sound pretty much the same. Here the two verses are again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Now, gap theorists want to translate the first two verses of Genesis this way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth became without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. There's one word changed here, but it's crucial. Verse 2 has the earth becoming. It became without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Now that wording suggests something occurred after verse 1, but before verse 2, to sort of change that circumstance. That something, according to the gap theory, is Satan's fall, and the corruption of the earth and God's wiping the slate clean. This cataclysm, gap theorists argue, explained both the fossil record and the presence of Satan in God's creation. God had originally created everything wonderful, but it became without form and void. And the darkness indicates to the theorists that these conditions were caused by something awful and sinister. The long ages of time that scientists insisted on for the early earth were what they were because God took a long time before deciding to recreate the earth in Genesis 1:3 with the pronouncement, "Let there be light." So by way of review, we have a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Something happened in there so that in verse 2 the earth became formless and empty and again engulfed by darkness. And then God decides to recreate everything in verse 3. Now it should be clear by this point that positing a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 2 and a restitution or recreation of an earth destroyed by Satan in that gap, beginning in Genesis 1:3, that all of that presupposes that Genesis 1:1 through 3 describes a linear chronology or a linear sequence of events. The problem is that Hebrew grammar explicitly rules that out. Now, biblical Hebrew, the language in which Genesis was written, has a way of denoting events in sequence and a way of stopping a sequence. In simplest terms, the normal way of narrating sequence is to prefix a one-letter conjunction, the vav, it's spelled W-A-W but pronounced vav, prefixing that one letter to the verbs that occur in succession. In Hebrew grammar, this narrative sequencing is called the vav consecutive, or the Vayiktol sequence. I've made a search of Genesis in my Bible software for this grammatical structure to show you how common it is in Genesis 1 and to show you where it doesn't occur.